Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment will come to order. I note that our clock up there was about 2 minutes slow. I was going by it and not by my trusty iPhone here. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email that document to documents, TI, capital D, documents, TI, capital T, capital I, at mail.house.gov. That's documents, TI, at mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for purposes of an opening statement. Today's hearing is part one of two in a series of hearings this subcommittee will hold on the President's fiscal year 2024 budget proposal. We will hear from the remaining agencies under this subcommittee's jurisdiction in part two. But today, we are pleased to have with us the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the Assistant Secretary for the Army for Civil Works, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation. I appreciate that we have both Major General Graham here today with the Corps and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Mr. Connor, from the political leadership with us here as well. Thank you, gentlemen. To start, I want to bring attention to an issue that is incredibly important to my constituents in North Carolina and communities all across the country. The definition of waters of the United States, or WOTUS, as we so often call it. The Corps plays a major role in enforcing the Clean Water Act, Section 404, dredge and fill permitting program over waters that are considered WOTUS. The WOTUS question has been debated for decades in court, along with a variety of presidential administrations weighing in. The definition of WOTUS and its implementation is more than simply a few words that lawyers and bureaucrats can make a career of, and many have. It is an issue regulated communities deal with daily, including our farmers, ranchers, home builders, private property owners, and infrastructure developers, among others. The Supreme Court recently delivered, in my opinion, a very clear, seemingly easily implementable decision regarding the definition of WOTUS in Sackett versus EPA. This ruling enables the administration to kickstart project completion and eliminate regulatory red tape while maintaining crucial environmental protections. The Supreme Court has now clarified what the intended scope of the Clean Water Act has been from the beginning. With the discarding of the significant nexus test, regulated communities will finally have some clarity under the law. Now, it's up to EPA and the Corps to quickly bring the Biden administration's legally flawed and obsolete WOTUS policy into compliance with the Sackett decision and provide implementation guidance consistent with the ruling. Regulated communities deserve the clarity of the Sackett ruling to be implemented in core districts across the country so that important projects can be permitted to move forward. I hope the Corps will focus its work towards compliance with Sackett rather than trying to find a way around it. On another note, Major General Graham and Assistant Secretary Connor, you both know how important the Corps projects are around the country, and in my district, the 7th District of North Carolina, is certainly no different. The beaches in my district rely on regular Army Corps maintenance to protect life, property, and our critical tourism economy. I'm pleased the Corps has provided an emergency use exemption of the Masonburr Inlet as the Wrightsville Beach Borough site for the upcoming renourishment project, which is a year delayed, as you know. Without speedy nourishment, Wrightsville Beach could suffer catastrophic disaster and losses in the event of a natural disaster. I also look forward to the administration's approval of the $10 million in emergency funding for the project under the Flood Control and Coastal Emergencies account. And I appreciate all the great work y'all are doing on that front. The President's budget proposal and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act would provide the Corps with robust funding, especially for flood control and beach nourishment maintenance activities. I hope the Corps will use the funds provided by both the IIJA and regular appropriations efficiently for those such projects. I have represented here today two other important entities, the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation. TVA has not taken any federal funds since 1999, which certainly is rare among entities created by Congress. I look forward to hearing more about TVA's all-of-the-above energy approach, utilizing a diverse portfolio of energy sources, including solar, natural gas, and nuclear, all while providing relatively stable rates and reliable power to its consumers. I'd also like to offer TVA a special congratulations on their 90th anniversary this year. Finally, congratulations to Mr. Tyndall Slitt on his appointment as administrator of GLS. GLS plays a very important role ensuring crucial routes from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean remain open via the St. Lawrence Seaway. At a time when we understand the need to strive for economic prosperity in the face of global competitors like China, the GLS provides important services to the flow of minerals, steel, and other critical goods. I look forward to hearing from each of our witnesses today, and I thank each of you for being here. I now recognize Ranking Member Napolitano for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing on President Biden's fiscal year 24 budget and agency priorities. First, I want to thank the agency's representatives for attending today's hearing, especially Assistant Secretary Connor and General Graham from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The Corps continues to be a leader in addressing the water resources challenges facing every corner of this nation, including the apparently not so unique drought challenges in my region. And I want to thank you for your service to my constituents and to the rest of the nation. Mr. Chairman, annual budget proposals of the administration and congressional leaders provide valuable insight into goals and priorities of their authors. Annual budgets provide an objective way to compare and contrast competing visions for the future of our country and for what we stand for in representing our constituents. This year, the contrasts are stark and telling. The Biden administration proposal lays out a bold vision to grow the economy from the bottom up, to invest in cleaner, greener, more accessible infrastructure, to create jobs and opportunities for all people, and to restore and protect our environment. That is the same vision shared by the House Democrats who, last Congress, passed the largest infrastructure investments in over a generation through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as other transformational infrastructure investment bills, such as the fifth Bipartisan Water Resource Development Act, or WRDA, in a row. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that. With each dollar invested and each new WRDA project implemented, everyday Americans will continue to reap the benefits of these transformational laws through the reduced transportation congestion, cleaner air, cleaner water, and a safer, more resilient and livable environment. I am concerned, however, that in the few months of control of the House, the Republican leadership has advanced a debt limit proposal that sought to hold the hostage the full faith and credit of our economy, while blindly slashing critical investments in our economy, our infrastructure, and our quality of life. For example, the House Republican debt limit proposal would have slashed funding for the Corps of Engineers by almost 25%, which would have significantly slowed project delivery and delayed the realization of critical transportation, flood control, and environmental benefits authorized through the annual WRDA. The House Republican proposal would have worsened supply chain delivery challenges, would have left rural and coastal communities more vulnerable to extreme weather events and flooding, and would have threatened critical environmental restoration projects, such as those in Chesapeake Bay and the Florida Everglades. I am further concerned that there has been a focus on putting polluters over people and eliminating Clean Water Act protections on over half of the nation's wetlands and up to 70% of the nation's streams, rivers, lakes. Congress needs to be protecting our rivers and streams and other water bodies for future generations. We need to be empowering states to continue to protect important waters within the state's own borders. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how Congress, the administration, can work together to invest in our water infrastructure and protect clean water for residential, recreation, and environmental uses. Mr. Chairman, I welcome my agency witnesses today. Thank you for your continued service, and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. I see our ranking member of the full committee is here, if he'd like to offer an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, Chair Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, for holding this hearing on the administration's fiscal year 24 budget request. Budget hearings are an important opportunity for authorizers to have a broader discussion about how to support the federal agencies we oversee and ensure the resources we provide line up with priorities and expectations. House Democrats have consistently supported the work of the Army Corps and have a long history of providing the Corps with the funding they need, or it needs, to complete the work that we ask of the agency. We know the Corps carries out projects of high importance across the U.S. The Corps supports our economy and supply chains by keeping ports, harbors, and inland waterways operating smoothly and efficiently. The Corps also constructs projects that prepare our communities for hurricanes, droughts, and floods and protects them from impacts. This work has only increased in importance as extreme weather events have grown in frequency and intensity due to climate change. It is far cheaper to invest in preventive measures than to recover after the fact. That's why House Democrats strive to proactively provide the Corps with the funding it needs to put more awarded projects into action. The bipartisan infrastructure law is a prime example of this. We provided a massive down payment, a total of about $17 billion, for the ongoing construction of critical awarded projects. To its credit, the Corps has shown exactly how and where they can spend that money, nearly all of it already being allocated. These BIL dollars at work are making a positive impact on water resources infrastructure. In contrast, the across-the-board cuts of 23% proposed by the Republican leadership to non-defense spending during the debt limit negotiations would have brought many awarded projects to a grinding halt. For the Corps specifically, a 23% cut meant $2 billion cuts based on fiscal year 23 appropriations, including a $40 million cut to the investigations account, which would have otherwise been used to generate more than 10 feasibility studies and a more than $1 billion cut to Corps operations and maintenance work, which literally keeps our economy afloat. Fortunately, these chaotic outcomes were avoided when we passed the bipartisan budget agreement. The more modest 1% cuts agreed to within the bill are surely a relief to agencies across the government, but now the House should keep its word instead of turn its back on that agreement. Congress can and should provide the Corps with more dollars to implement projects authorized in worded bills. I hope the appropriators hear us on that. With all that we continuously require and expect of this agency, we need to support it with funding that allows the Corps to do the job that we ask it to do, to execute the work that benefits communities across the country. So I want to thank the witnesses for joining us today, and I look forward to your testimony. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back because I basically introduced each of you in my opening statement. Just a couple of housekeeping items here before we get to it. Obviously, we have a lighting system. Green is go, yellow is beware, red is right around the corner. And to my colleagues on the committee, and I am guilty of this from time to time, try not to ask a question with 1 second left. I ask unanimous consent that the witness's full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Assistant Secretary Connor, you are recognized for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, Ranking Member Larson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the President's FY 2024 budget. As you know, the Army Civil Works Program serves 3 main missions: flood and storm damage reduction, commercial navigation, and aquatic ecosystem restoration, and supports related project purposes such as water supply, hydropower, and recreation. The 24 budget request includes over $7.4 billion for the Army Civil Works Program, which is the largest request in history, complemented by an additional $1.05 billion from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. These investments demonstrate President Biden's ongoing commitment to funding the construction of critical infrastructure projects that strengthen our economy, protect people and property, and restore key ecosystems. The water resources challenges of today are not like those of yesterday. Weather extremes are increasingly the norm, so understanding vulnerabilities and increasing our preparedness is of the utmost importance. For that reason, the budget proposes $86 million, the largest request in Corps' history, for research and development. The focus of this work will be on innovative solutions that address the emerging water resources challenges of the 21st century and achieve cost savings in the Civil Works program. The budget focuses on the highest performing work within the three main missions of the Civil Works program. In developing the budget, consideration was also given to advancing three key objectives for the administration. One, decreasing climate risk for communities and the environment. Two, promoting environmental justice in underserved and tribal communities. And three, strengthening the nation's supply chains. First, the Corps has always been in the resilience business, and climate-focused investments include more than $1.4 billion for the construction of flood and storm damage reduction and aquatic ecosystem restoration projects. Second, the budget supports the administration's Justice 40 initiative through investments in 23 studies and construction of 33 projects to help disadvantaged and tribal communities address their water resources challenges. Priority 3, the budget facilitates safe, reliable, and sustainable commercial navigation to support U.S. competitiveness and improve the resilience of our nation's manufacturing supply chain, supporting American jobs and the economy. The administration's commitment to our coastal ports and inland waterways is represented by over $3.4 billion for inland and coastal navigation projects, including $1.7 billion derived from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Deeper in the construction budget, it provides $653 million for aquatic ecosystem restoration, including $450 million to continue restoring America's Everglades and $67 million to support salmon recovery efforts in the Columbia River Basin. Other significant construction activity includes $655 million for dam safety activity at Prado Dam in California, $350 million to replace the Cape Cod Canal bridges, $235 million to continue the construction of the Sioux Locks projects. In total, 2024 construction is funded at more than $2 billion. In addition to these new projects, the budget invests in O&M in the Corps' existing infrastructure and improving reliability and performance by providing over $4.4 billion in the O&M account. Investigations and recreation are also provided significant funding as set forth in my statement, and the regulatory program is robustly funded at $221 million to support the administration's priority on permitting activities. Summarizing, the budget makes critical investments that will benefit the American people and promote greater prosperity and economic growth for decades to come. I'll conclude by addressing the definition of waters of the United States, a topic that you've just identified, Chairman, is very important to you and the committee as a whole. For 50 years, the Clean Water Act, arguably the most successful environmental law enacted to date, has been the foundation for remarkable progress in restoring water quality in rivers, streams, and wetlands across the nation. While I was disappointed with the recent decision by the Supreme Court, we are nonetheless working closely with EPA to develop a new rule to amend the Waters of the United States definition, the rule that was published in the Federal Register on January 18, 2023. This new rule will be consistent with the Supreme Court's May 25th decision in the case of Sackett v. EPA. We are already hard at work, and based on the significant work completed in January already, we are in a position to issue this final rule expeditiously. Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Major General Graham.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano.
Turn your microphone on.
Member Larson.
I don't think the microphone's on.
How's that?
Thank you.
All right, even better. Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, Ranking Member Larson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to testify before you today, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss the fiscal 2024 budget request for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I look forward to answering the subcommittee's questions on the status of the Corps' projects and programs. Most importantly, I look forward to continuing to work with this committee, Congress, and the administration to address the nation's critical water resource infrastructure needs. I thank the subcommittee for supporting the Corps' Civil Works program. Your commitment since 2014 to passing biennial water resource development acts has provided us with the authorities necessary to address the changing needs of the nation's water resources infrastructure. Example, in WRDA 2022, Congress authorized 25 new construction projects, 94 new feasibility studies, and 131 new environmental infrastructure projects. These studies and projects, when funded, will strengthen the supply chain, address the climate crisis, advance environmental justice, invest in tribes, and provide needed water resource projects to traditionally underserved communities. Looking a bit closer at WRDA 22, it provides enhanced flexibilities for the Corps to address our changing climate, including observed sea level rise, increased frequency and magnitude of river flooding, and historic extremes in precipitation and drought. Such provisions allow the Corps to respond more comprehensively to coastal and inland flooding during the planning phase of new projects and during the repair and restoration of existing projects. Furthermore, the legislation underscores congressional intent in increasing the Corps' role in drought resiliency by, for example, expanding the use of forecast-informed reservoir operations. The 2024 budget and other recent funding, combined with awarded legislation, provides the Corps with what Mr. Connor calls transformational opportunities to deliver water resource infrastructure projects that will positively impact communities across the nation. To take advantage of this opportunity, the Army Corps is focused on three main areas. First and foremost, we're focused on delivery. We maintain a sense of urgency to safely deliver quality projects on schedule and within budget. We're making any and all changes necessary to ensure we deliver and are not late to need. The task force we're standing up in Puerto Rico is a good example of this transformation in action. Secondly, we recognize the importance of our partnerships, starting with our non-federal sponsors, the communities and the states we work in and are part of. We need to listen better, not just at the DC level, but at the local project level where it matters the most. We need to listen better to our industry partners, unleashing the creativity and talents of the private sector. Under Mr. Connor's guidance, we're working hard to listen better to tribal nations and other underserved groups. The 4 new committees authorized in Word of 22 will help ensure that all voices are heard. And finally, we're focused on innovation, meeting the challenges of climate change, addressing water supply and water conservation needs, addressing the needs of the underserved communities, and modernizing our infrastructure needed to maintain our economic edge, all demand innovation. I'll conclude by saying that we value deeply the authorities you entrusted in us. Our pledge is to put them to work to deliver for the American people. And thank you, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, and Ranking Member Larson. I look forward to answering your questions.
Mr. Lyash.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, and subcommittee members for allowing me to represent the more than 10,000 employees and 20,000 contract partners who deliver on the Tennessee Valley Authority's mission of service. TVA was established, as was said, 90 years ago on a clear mission to benefit the public good across the Tennessee Valley region by providing energy, economic development, and environmental stewardship. Today, TVA remains focused on the large-scale challenges that our nation and region face, meeting rising energy demand, growing American manufacturing, and our economy, reducing energy burden for families, mitigating climate change, and addressing growing cybersecurity threats. We are actively investing in the next generation of technologies to ensure that we maintain our nation's energy security while expanding our asset portfolio to include additional affordable, reliable, and clean resources for the future. In terms of energy, TVA is the nation's largest public power provider and the 3rd largest power producer overall. Our service territory is one of the fastest growing in the nation, covering portions of 7 states in Tennessee Valley geographic area. TVA partners with 153 local power companies and 58 directly served customers to support the communities and the people of the region, and our customers include 7 military and federal installations. We're proud of our mission to support national security by producing tritium to support the nation's defense program. We operate one of the nation's most diverse, cleanest generation portfolios, including nuclear, hydro, solar, and gas. We also operate one of the nation's largest transmission systems. TVA operates through revenues primarily from our electric power generation system. We receive no appropriations, and we work hard to maintain the lowest rates feasible for our customers, guided by least cost planning mandates. TVA currently has approximately $12.5 billion in annual revenues and an asset base of more than $51 billion. For nearly a decade now, we have followed a disciplined financial plan to reduce TVA's debt. TVA's total financial obligations are at the lowest level in more than 30 years. TVA debt is not guaranteed by the United States and does not count against the U.S. Treasury's debt limit. TVA's low rates and our historically high reliability are energizing new jobs and investment across the region. TVA partnerships helped our service territory create or retain nearly 350,000 jobs and attract almost $49 billion in projected capital investment in just the past 5 years. Because of TVA's economic development mission, we must operate as efficiently and effectively as the best investor-owned utilities to remain competitive in attracting new business. Population, economic and industrial growth, and expanded electrification are creating sustained regional load growth. We anticipate needing at least 50 to 100% more energy than we currently produce by 2050. TVA already is a national leader in carbon reduction. Currently, more than half of TVA's produced energy is carbon-free, and our goal is to reach net zero. TVA is dramatically expanding our solar generation, actively working toward 10,000 new megawatts. We have an industry-leading nuclear fleet and have a path to extend the lifetime of those units. We have a global leadership position in advanced nuclear generation, working with domestic and international partners to develop standard small modular reactor design that can be deployed by TVA. Other carbon-free energy innovation investments include partnership in a Southeast Hydrogen Hub Coalition and TVA's first grid-scale energy storage facility. And we'll share all these technologies and best practices. At our roots, TVA is one of the nation's vital river management and flood control agencies. We manage one of the country's largest river systems, the 652-mile Tennessee River System, which averts flood damage and promotes economic development. One of the enduring legacies of TVA's 90-year history of service is that we continually seek to increase the value we deliver to those that we serve. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer the committee's questions.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Tyndall Slick, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Napolitano, Ranking Member Larson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity today to present the President's fiscal year 24 budget request for the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation. The mission of the GLS is to operate and maintain the U.S. infrastructure and waterways of the St. Lawrence Seaway, while also performing trade and economic development activities that are designed to enhance utilization of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system. The GLS is primarily responsible for maintaining and operating Eisenhower and Snell locks located in Messina, New York, while also controlling commercial vessel traffic in the U.S. sections of the St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario. Since the Seaway opened in 1959, the GLS has directly served commercial maritime transportation stakeholders by providing a safe, reliable, and efficient deep draft international waterway in cooperation with its Canadian counterpart, the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation. Binational coordination on an ongoing basis is imperative, as a vessel that transits into the Great Lakes will cross the international border 27 times while passing through the waterway's 2 U.S. locks and 13 Canadian locks. The Seaway serves as a vital artery for trade and a key component of the North American supply chain, supporting economic development while ensuring the efficient movement of goods between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean. This also enhances the United States defense capabilities and international cooperation. More than 3 billion tons of cargo, valued at over $500 billion, has transited through the Seaway over its 65-year history. During the 2022 navigation season, more than 36 million tons of cargo moved through this binational waterway. In fulfilling its mission, the GLS produces significant economic benefits across the Great Lakes region. An economic study completed in 2018 showed that maritime commerce on the Seaway sustains over 237,000 U.S. and Canadian jobs, $35 billion in economic activity, over $14 billion in personal income, and over $6 billion in federal, state, provincial, and local taxes on an annual basis. For fiscal year 24, the President's budget requests an appropriation for the GLS of $40.3 million from the Harbor Maintenance Trust. This budget request includes two programs, Seaway Operations and Maintenance, as well as Seaway Infrastructure. The overall budget request supports the administration's priorities of safety, job creation, economic growth, and transformational infrastructure investment. The 2024 request for Seaway Operations and Maintenance totals $24 million, providing financial and personnel resources, allowing us to perform the operational and administrative functions of the corporation, including lock operations, marine services, vessel traffic, ballast water management, safety, security, and environmental inspections, as well as international trade promotion. The 24 request for Seaway Infrastructure totals $16.3 million. The locks, channels, and accompanying infrastructure of the Seaway, which is owned and operated by the GLS, are perpetual transportation assets, requiring regular capital reinvestment, allowing them to continue our record of safety, reliability, and efficiency. The United States Congress has supported GLS infrastructure renewal by investing over $209 million on 62 unique capital infrastructure projects since 2009. These investments have resulted in the lowest level of lock delays and vessel safety incidents on the Great Lakes Seaway in navigation history. In sum, the FY24 budget request will ensure that the corporation will continue to operate and maintain U.S. Seaway infrastructure, will ensure safe vessel navigation, will help protect the Great Lakes ecology, will address needed maintenance, will help rehabilitate and enhance GLS facilities, and promote economic development throughout the Great Lakes region. I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you.
I thank the gentlemen for their testimony today, and now we'll move in to questions. I recognize myself for up to 5 minutes. First, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter sent by Chairman Sam Graves and myself, as well as Republican leaders from the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, Senators Shelley Moore Capito and Cynthia Loomis, to Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Mr. Connor, and EPA Administrator Michael Regan, dated June 21, 2023. Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Connor, can you elaborate more on what the administration plans to do moving forward? And the first question I have, before you get to that one, is, do you agree the ruling, the Sackett ruling, understand that the administration doesn't like the ruling, as you mentioned in your testimony, but do you agree the ruling provides clarity?
Yes, the ruling provides clarity for the most part. There are some nuances there that I think people would debate, but as far as our view of the rule and its implementation, we will implement a new rule with those clear parameters in the Sackett decision in place. So there will always be some debate. Mr. Chairman, I guess that's what I'm getting at. But for the most part, it's a very clear.
Now, are you moving to a final rule, or is this going to follow the normal rulemaking process, and what kind of timeline are we looking at?
I expect that we will be moving forward with a final rule as allowed by the Administrative Procedures Act.
Okay.
And that work is, to elaborate on your prior question, that work is already underway. We're already surgically looking at the rule that was promulgated in January, looking at the adjustments, and I do believe that there is great value to that rule because it does have separable elements such as significant nexus, which obviously does no longer apply, which can be X'd out of the rule. Other aspects the rule was unaffected, exemptions. You know, primary waters, whether they're navigable, territorial seas, those primary jurisdictional waters, the relatively permanent test that the court maintained, that's part of the rule. That will stay as a whole piece. Continuous surface connection, there is an aspect of that that is in the rule that will obviously be preserved. Other parts of the rules that are affected will no longer be part of what we expect to be a final rule that will be issued expeditiously.
So comment period, will there be any comment period? A lot of stakeholders on both sides would like to have input, I'm sure.
Even in moving to direct final rulemaking, there's allowances for comment period. Those decisions have not yet been finalized. I expect, I get that expeditiously is not as specific as you would probably like at this point in time. But it does mean as soon as possible. We have a duty to deal with ongoing litigation. I expect in the next week we will firm up the more specific answers to your question, Mr. Chairman.
So will guidance be released to the district core offices from headquarters to allow approved jurisdictional determinations to be completed? What's the timeline for that?
Well, I think we're going to focus on this next step, final rulemaking. I think that will provide, because of the work that we've done previously, that will provide significant guidance to the Corps. But with respect to issuing AJDs, which we have taken a pause on, I don't expect that we will be back in the AJD business until we get this final rule in place. The Corps ties its jurisdictional determinations to the rules that are in place right now. We have the January 2023 rule, I think, in 23 jurisdictions. We have pre-2015 guidance regulations in 27 jurisdictions. We need to clean that all up, have a clear final rule that the Corps can tie its jurisdictional determinations. So same, I guess, answer to the question is expeditiously, we will get back into the AJD's determinations as soon as we finalize this rule.
So in your estimation, how different is this new rule going to look versus the current rule? Do you think it's a serious or a significant deviation from the current rule, or similar, trying to incorporate the merit or the fundamentals of the court's ruling?
It'll be different because the significant nexus test is no longer applicable. So that will be out of the final rule that we are making. So, you know, we're trying to be pretty straightforward with this, Mr. Chairman. There will be, you know, specific aspects of that rule that are no longer valid given the court's determination. In second, we will delete those portions of the rule. But as I mentioned, I think there are many aspects of the rule that will still stand that are very consistent with the SACIT decision, such as relatively permanent or unaffected, such as the exemptions, express exemptions that we provided in the rule.
My time has expired. I now recognize my friend and colleague from California, Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Connor, Secretary Connor, WRDA 2020 established clear direction to the Corps to allocate 12% of the Harbor Maintenance Fund for expanded uses at donor ports, such as Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and other energy transfer ports. However, the Corps did not meet this funding allocation to donor ports in 2023. My region's ports and donor ports throughout the nation worked with Congress to ensure they receive their fair share of HMT funds. Section 102 of WRDA 2020 culminated this HMT funds agreement by specifically directing the Corps to meet the statutory targets in the law passed by Congress and signed by the President. Furthermore, surprising that donor ports are not receiving the WRDA 2020 allocations when your testimony states that the Corps gives priority to maintenance of coastal ports with the highest commercial traffic. Does the Corps recognize that the WRDA 2020 provides clear direction on Congress's intent to ensure donor ports receive their fair share of HMT funds? And is the Corps aware of the specific donor ports requests for expanded use eligibilities outlined in WRDA 2020, including specific requests from Los Angeles and Long Beach? How will the Corps be responsive to these requests in light of the clear allocation language for donor ports in WRDA 2020 and your testimony that high-volume commercial harbors are prioritized?
Ranking Member Napolitano, this has been a subject of great discussion since we released our budget, and there are a lot of interest in that expanded uses for donor ports provision that was included in WRDA 2020. So to the extent I didn't understand the congressional intent, I guarantee I understand it a lot more right now. We don't have a provision for that. The law specifically says to the extent possible. Our priority is always going to be to use the resources we have to maintain channel capacity, depth, and width, and that's the responsibility. But we do understand the WRDA 2020 provision was Congress's intent that there is a balance there that we have to maintain with those donor ports and their need for resources for expanded uses. So not including the 2024 budget, what we are doing now is asking the Corps to survey those donor ports, understand the demand, the need for those expanded use resources, so that we will have that information as what I would expect through the appropriations process. There will be a 2024 work plan. We will have that information available to try and accommodate, consistent with the language to the extent possible, those expanded uses for donor reports. So we need the information. We need to then balance that with our fundamental obligation for depth and with maintaining the channels through our process.
Well, that's 3 years. We hope to get it done before too long, sir. The next question is, we directed the Corps to undertake a study implementing water supply as the Corps' mission. I'm very concerned study has not been completed yet, and the status of the study is, and when do we expect completion?
So with respect to the study itself, as we discussed previously, Ranking Member Napolitano, these reports take a while, and they take a while because they require resources. We sometimes try and answer too many questions rather than the direct one that Congress asked us to address. Basically, I apologize for the length of time that it takes. With respect to this particular report, it's gone back and forth between my office and the Corps. I expect I'll have it again here in the next month, and we will expeditiously turn this around to get this completed for you in the July-August timeframe. That is my goal and my commitment to you. Can I just say very quickly, though, notwithstanding the status of the report, we are all on board, and we are taking actions very consistent with what your goal is in the Corps having a role with respect to water supply issues, particularly in the West. Through our programs and through our projects, and to the projects that we're in the design phase on, we have the means and the ability to work with our partners to help facilitate water supply.
And you have the money.
Yes.
The Corps is increasingly doing important work updating water control manuals in the West, specifically water conservation measures. What's the current water control manual updates?
You want to take the water control?
Ranking Member Napolitano, thank you for that question on our water control manuals. And flat out, we are behind on updating them. The water control manuals should take no longer than 10 years to update them, and we have many that are beyond that.
50 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So we are prioritizing that on our work. We do have some challenge. I'll give you one, for instance, that's probably near and dear to your heart. When I looked at the Sacramento district, I asked them about Lake Oroville, which that water control manual, which has FIRO as part of it, is probably going to take about up to 7 years. So I asked where their engineers are working right now. We pulled them to work on the drought, or I'm sorry, on the snowpack coming off the Sierra Nevadas. So that's our challenge right now, and we're committed to providing the labor necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence.
Mr. Mast.
Thank you, Chairman, General, Essayons, Secretary. Thank you both for being here. If your staff's briefed you that I want to talk about algal blooms, as I'm sure all my colleagues know I want to talk about, then you're right. They were right to brief you about that. So last year, Word of 2022, we moved a provision that directed the Army Corps to put a note in the file of personnel working around structures on Lake Okeechobee that have high exposures to toxic algal blooms. So I want to get a little idea of where that's at, what that's looking like today. You got an image up here. This is what the lake looks like today, where you see all that red. That's where the wind pushes all those toxic algal blooms up into my area. So it is taking place as we speak, has been taking place throughout the summer already. So first question, just has implementation of denoting that in a file in some form or fashion begun?
Congressman Ness, thank you for that question. And I don't know if you planned it this way or it just worked out this way, but I did get a call last night from General Hibner, is that at Port Mayarca, Structure 308, we did have testing that exceeded 8 parts per billion from
80, I was told, so 10x. 80 was the number I was told.
So my report was higher than that. And the first report, as you well know, is always wrong, but it certainly exceeded 8 parts per billion. So the Jacksonville District has put in place, as per Order 22, Section 8141, that we will, for any worker that was at Port Myarka, and I think there's only one there, we will document that in their records. In addition, as when you and I met there, I think it's 3 years ago now, measures to protect the employees, and that can include limiting outside exposure and masks when possible. We're also reporting that to the South Florida Water Management District, and we'll work with Mr. Bartlett and his team to see if we need to come out and do mitigation efforts.
It can be fluid which staff are out there, civilian, uniformed. Is the intent of the Corps of Engineers to do that for both civilian and uniformed personnel if they're?
Absolutely, and we're working through the procedures for medical privacy to make sure we do that correctly.
And give us an idea of what would that look like, a dosimeter would look like for somebody that had radiological exposure where it's added up over time, or would it be a letter for each day that somebody is exposed and it says, hey, you worked 8 hours today or 10 hours today, and it gives us an idea of what that would look, what it actually will look like in practice.
Right now, I believe it's going to look like a letter that goes in their file that documents that, but we're developing this as we go, and I'm sure we'll have some things to learn.
What would be a full day for somebody out there typically?
I believe those are 8-hour shifts.
Okay. All right. I thank you for the answers on that. It's good information to me to understand how you're actually implementing this. I want to move a little bit to earlier in the season, sticking with algal blooms. There were discharges going on out of Lake Okeechobee to the coastline. It was going on back in February. It was going on, I think, even in part in January. But those discharges were stopped because of untraditionally early season algal blooms. I can't remember seeing them in January, February, March before. And so I thank the Corps and the South Florida Water Management District for working together to stop those discharges when algal blooms became present. The question that I want to ask you might seem obvious, but it's obvious because I'm looking to have an answer on the record of why this took place. Why did the Corps and the Water Management District stop those discharges, whether they were at 8 parts per billion or 80 or whatever the level was at that time? Why was that decision made to stop those discharges at that time? What did you consider the impacts to be that you said, hey, it's important enough that we stop these or stop these until we test them or whatever reason? Walk me through that decision-making so the community can understand the hazards.
So, Congressman Miss, I don't know the specifics on that instance. I was aware that we were discharging east, and my understanding sitting here today is that the pause or the stopping those discharges east was mainly a water management decision. But I'm not 100% certain that it wasn't that at S308 there were those algal blooms and they didn't want to release them. So
I'm going to pause because I got about 10 seconds left. I appreciate that I don't think it was for water management reasons. I think it was because of the presence of those blooms. We're going to write you some questions for the record. If you could get back to us with answers on that decision-making process at a later time.
Absolutely.
We'd appreciate those answers. Thank you, Chairman. I can't yield you back anytime, but thank you for recognizing me.
Absolutely. Mr. Larson.
Thank you. The first question I have is for Mr. Tyndall Schlitt. About 10 years ago, I think it was Representative Oberstar asked the Great Lakes Seaway Corporation to do I think it was a capital improvement program, update your capital assets. It's been about 10 years for that 10-year plan. How would you assess yourself right now in terms of the update of your capital assets?
The work remains ongoing, and it has been a success. Again, $209 million on 62 different capital asset projects have been invested in an array of seaway infrastructure projects. We credit that as both 10 years ago when the Capital Asset Renewal Program was founded, that was reactive. The assets then were 50 years old and required an intervention to make sure that they could continue operating. In its current form, including in the '24 budget, the Seaway Infrastructure Program is proactive, looking at the state of those assets, locks, vessels, our facilities that help us support the ongoing operation of the Seaway. making sure that they'll continue to operate for decades ahead.
All right, thank you. Mr. Connor, certainly a 23% cut in the Corps' budget would have been fairly disastrous in my district and probably many other districts. Now we're looking at something along the lines, at least in the House of Representatives, based on a fiscal year 22 instead of the deal that was negotiated, and people ought to be sticking with, which is 1%. Have you, as a Corps, been asked to look at what the appropriations might mean if we adopted an FY22 number for either your operations and maintenance or for your capital?
Ranking Member Larson, we have not looked specifically at that provision. You know, we are fortunate with respect to the $17.1 billion that were provided, that we've got resources to attack a significant part of the backlog, and we've been doing that. I think the reality is, you know, obviously I support the President's budget. The $7.4 billion that we have will be used wisely to continue the highest priority projects and the ones that we need to maintain to minimize risk and maximize efficiency. So we're focused on the investments we can make with that budget. Obviously, the additional resources that Congress has been providing in the annual appropriations process is absolutely critical. Just getting to the discussion we just had about expanded uses, there are a lot of things left on the cutting room table that I know are priorities for Congress. And I was, you know, the mark that was just issued by House Energy and Water does provide significant additional resources on top of the budget. We will continue to work with members of Congress in effectively deploying any resources that we might finally get. But, you know, to your point, we have a huge backlog, and we have a huge number of needs, and they're growing given the most recent WRDA that we've seen with additional authorizations and additional needs by communities across the country.
Well, for those of us who voted for IIJA, publicly we say you're welcome. For those who voted against it, I'm sure privately they'll say thank you to you as well. With regards to, General, with regards to outreach to, especially to tribes, you put this in the context of Justice 40, which I think is really, really important, especially where I come from. I can think of probably 6 of the federally recognized tribes of the 8 that I have a privilege to share jurisdiction with. All probably have very close relationships with the tribe and with the Corps. What are there specific additional outreach steps the Corps is taking to tribal through the Tribal Partnership Program that you can enlighten us about?
Ranking Member Larson, thank you, and absolutely. With Mr. Connor's guidance, we're working to listen better to the tribes. The additional funding that we received, the supplemental funding, the BIL funding is certainly helping with that. We have some rapid tools to be able to do that better, planning systems for states, floodplain management services, and the Continuing Authorities Program. But most importantly, the changes and advancements to the Tribal Partnership Program.
Can I just quickly add, new guidance will be issued for the Tribal Partnership Program. Congress has given us additional tools. You know, we're trying to move from a tribal program where we don't harm tribal interests to we effectively move forward tribal interests. TPP is part of that. We have a new consultation policy out on the street to ensure that we're responsive to tribe, that we're not just listening, but we're actually responding to what we hear. This is a huge priority for the administration. It's a huge priority for the Civil Works Program.
That's great. I appreciate that. Yield back.
Mr. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lyish, I've been only on this Hill for 6 months now, so every day is a new first for me. I'm particularly pleased that you've offered me a new first in appearing before a committee with the testimony that your organization receives no federal appropriation and that your debt is not reported by the U.S. Treasury. So thank you. Thank you for offering that. I also thank you and applaud the tour that your staff gave me and my staff recently, the hydro dam in my district. It's a very impressive operation, and I appreciate the clean energy and a significant amount of energy that you provide to Western North Carolina. TVA, as you know, is responsible for advancing the economic and social well-being of the people living in the Tennessee River Basin. And that's a responsibility that seems to me to go well beyond its traditional role of generating power and distributing that power. And given the importance of broadband connectivity in today's economy, particularly in western North Carolina, where the topography is so complicated, I'd argue that fulfilling TVA's statutory objective includes ensuring that residents of TVA areas are given access to quality internet service. And due to the mountainous terrain of my district, many of my constituents in western North Carolina continue to go without internet access. However, utility poles can play a key role in expanding connectivity to rural communities. And I've had the pleasure of working with you and TVA's on plans for new utility poles in my district. And it's my understanding that TVA has the authority to regulate a local power company's pole access process with broadband providers seeking to service the Tennessee River Basin. Proactive efforts to collaborate with broadband companies would be monumental for the citizens in my district. And I'm confident that my fellow representatives of the Tennessee River Basin would agree. What obstacles exist today to your cooperation with local power companies to bring broadband access to underserved areas in the TVA River Basin?
Thank you for the question, Congressman, and thank you for the kind remarks. I appreciate them, and I know the team does. TVA is not directly responsible for deploying broadband, but I agree with you. Our mission of service and the nexus of broadband with providing energy, being able to apply the technology that makes energy transmission efficient, and economic development, both parts of our mission have an intersection with universal deployment of broadband access. And so in that regard, we see it as very important. A few things that we're focused on. TVA is deploying hundreds of miles of fiber across the Tennessee Valley region and supporting use of that fiber by local power companies and providers on a lease basis to give them access to the broader internet system. And many are taking us up on that. We established a process to enable pole attachments by for-profit providers, and we're working with local power companies to make sure that they provide them timely and effective access where those providers are looking to do that.
And so, excuse me, because I'm running out of time, there are a couple of questions I'd really like to get to. And I appreciate the efforts that have been made, but you hold one of the greatest assets in western North Carolina, and that is those power poles. Are there any specific obstacles that are preventing TVA from granting access to those power poles for for-profit companies that would like to extend broadband to western North Carolina?
Yeah, from TVA's perspective and our assets, the answer is no. Remember, we serve retail customers through 153 local power companies, so predominantly the providers need access to local power company distribution poles. And in that regard, we're working with each local power company to ensure they provide that access. And if internet providers are not willing to serve the area, that local power companies can stand up a business to do so. And we've made quite a lot of progress in this regard over the last number of years. We do still have pockets that need support, and I agree that your area is one of them.
So can I get your commitment that we'll continue to work on that together to bring broadband access to rural North Carolina?
Yes, you have my commitment, and not just to support it, to act as a convener to draw local power companies, the providers together with TVA to develop some site-specific, area-specific plans that do just that.
Thank you. I look forward to that.
You're quite welcome.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Stanton, you're recognized for 5
Thank you
minutes.
very much, Mr. Chairman. The 2020 Water Resources Development Act included my legislation to authorize the Arizona Environmental Infrastructure Authority to assist Arizona communities and tribes with their water infrastructure needs. In the nearly 3 years since, we have delivered more than $37 million, thanks in part to the bipartisan infrastructure law for 23 projects across the state, including a water reclamation facility in my district. I was pleased to see for the first time that the administration include environmental infrastructure funding in its budget request. Although the amount requested is small compared to the amount Congress has provided for EI over the last several years, its inclusion in the budget is long overdue, and it's a long overdue recognition of the importance of these projects within the Corps' overall mission. In a July 2022 memo, the Corps notes that EI funding is a key component of its efforts to support drought-impacted communities in the West. As we continue to deal with the significant impacts of the 1,200-year drought in the Colorado River Basin, the Corps should not let up on its support for EI funding to help Arizona communities utilize wastewater more efficiently, recharge area aquifers, and improve water delivery through new wells and pipelines. Since the Arizona EI Authority first launched, my office has worked closely with the LA District to select projects to be funded. For fiscal year 2024, we identified 5 projects totaling several million dollars, yet the Corps division has indicated a capability of only $100,000. This is a vastly different capability than we expected, and I am frustrated that the Corps has seemingly ignored the district's recommendations despite a clear need. And further, the Corps failed to communicate with my office about it. We now face a scenario based on the current draft of the House Energy and Water Appropriations Bill that there will be no additional resources for Arizona communities to advance their environmental infrastructure projects. This probably would not have been the case had the Corps communicated that it would only identify capability for individual priority projects. I have questions for Assistant Secretary Connor and General Graham. Why is there a disconnect between what the LA District has expressed as capability and what division and headquarters believe is that capability? And why is there a difference in capability for a standalone project under the EI Authority versus including the same project and several others in a general funding request under the authority?
Representative Stanton, first, thank you for that question, and I own that failure. Talked to the commander in LA, and we own the miscommunication, and we apologize for that. Our capability is certainly above $100,000. Miscommunication was they thought that was for programmatic administrative oversight. Right? So that's my failure. I think the capability is truly more around $14 million when you aggregate all those projects together, and we'll continue to work with your office to make sure that we can meet your needs programmatically. The district has raised its game. It's added additional staff, which is a great thing. It's upgraded its website, but we realize we need to do better at this, and our commitment to you is to do just that.
Please.
Congressman, if I could just add very quickly, Arizona is ground zero for the extended drought and long-term reductions in water supply that we project for the American West. It's impressive, the work that the communities are doing and using all the tools of government. We view ourselves as part of that whole of government response to this situation. So our EI program is a huge part of that. We'll fix the miscommunications because this is an important way the Corps can be part of the solutions to help Arizona transition to that reduced water future.
I appreciate the apology and acknowledgement that 14 million is probably the more appropriate number. What steps is the Corps taking to correct this with the Appropriations Committee?
With respect to the appropriations that we have available, we're going to have to think that through, quite frankly. So let us see what resources we have, and then we will get back to you on the record for that.
Changing gears, I want to touch on the Trace Rios Ecosystem Restoration Project. We've talked about it many times, Assistant Secretary Connor. Is the Corps on track to complete the post-authorization change report and cost update in time for the 2024 WRDA bill?
We're going to have to get back to you on the record for that one. Congressman Stanton.
I look forward to hearing back from you soon on both of those critically important issues to the state of Arizona. I yield back.
Absolutely.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Babin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I want to say thank you to all of you witnesses for being here today. I'm from Texas and represent the 36th District, which is home to some critical ports and waterways, so I'd like to thank you all for your commitment to protecting and improving our nation's waterways and natural resources. Mr. Connor, my questions today are for you. There's been a lot of discussion in this Congress on permitting reform to ensure project completion. In fact, in the IIJA, Congress provided significant resources to assist with permitting approval. I just wanted to ask you, what is the average time for the Corps to make a decision on a dredge and fill permit application?
I'm going to defer to General Graham on that particular
Okay,
question.
General.
For a general permit,
That's
our,
right.
our
Dredge and
sta-
fill permit,
our standard is to do those within 60 days.
60 days.
And our track record at meeting that is roughly 75% of the time right now.
Okay. And how can this process be expedited while ensuring that we remain good stewards of our environment? What are some of the things we can do?
So one of the things that we're doing to get more responsive to the regulated public is leveraging technology. The bipartisan infrastructure law provided us $160 million to get better. And one of the things we're investing those funds in is moving into the current century with getting away from a paper process and moving into an online process, e-permitting, what we called it. And the great news is we should have that up and running at the end of this fiscal year, or end of this calendar year.
One of the biggest delays that we hear complaints about all the time is permitting. So I hope that we can, whatever it takes, expedite that. Also, another question, the President's FY24 budget request includes, and you mentioned this, I think, Mr. Connor, one of y'all did, this was the largest request in Army Corps history for research and development, for R&D. What kind of research and development projects does the Corps intend to use these funds on? And General or Secretary, whichever one can
So
answer.
the R&D funds are distributed amongst 6 different categories.
Okay.
We do tactical R&D, which we've always done. That's the part of the budget that hasn't changed. This is where we support the R&D needed to carry out specific projects. So that will maintain, that's an important part of what we do. Coastal Texas was an example of that. We do research associated to put together that plan. Other areas, we have ecosystem-related R&D, algal bloom discussion that we just had with Congressman Mass. Water modeling is a huge part of that R&D initiative. This is forecast-informed reservoir operations, advanced water modeling so that we can operate our facilities different. We are doing a lot of infrastructure R&D to help inspect and hopefully we drive down our maintenance costs. So we're looking at long-term reductions in civil works. Other areas, sediment management, how can we more actively promote beneficial use of dredge material? And then even crisis mitigation. An example of that is post-wildfire response. What is our modeling capability to project where we might have debris flows and extreme flooding from post-wildfire events, and how do we address that then through our emergency programs?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And thirdly, and finally, the fiscal year 24 President's budget request is almost $900 million below fiscal year 23 enacted budget. So how would your office decide what projects are going to receive these reductions for which the Army Civil Works program is utilizing? What are some of those criteria and what are some of those programs?
So we're focused on one aspect of that's a priority that we've shared for a long time, which is completing projects. We want to use resources to complete projects. We want to address the most significant risk areas, so that is a large focus of the O&M activity that we have. Beyond that, there are priorities. How do we promote, the objectives of our primary mission, aquatic ecosystem restoration, maintaining our ports and waterways, and certainly our flood reduction, coastal and inland flooding projects. So we prioritize based on where we are in construction schedules, how we distribute that to promote the resilience activity that we need, and lastly, we're also trying to promote more economic equity with respect to the investments we make. So it's a mix of risk, finishing projects, and then advancing items that are soon to be completed, and then addressing other priorities such as environmental justice, et cetera.
Okay, I'm out of time. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one question. It is for Major General William Graham. The District of Columbia is wholly dependent on the Potomac River for its drinking water, but natural or man-made events could render the river unusable for drinking water. This poses a risk both to the operations of the federal government and to DC residents. Currently, the Potomac River is being monitored for drought conditions as rainfall is significantly below normal levels. The federally owned and operated Washington Aqueduct produces drinking water from the Potomac River for the District of Columbia and parts of Virginia. However, the aqueduct maintains only a single day of backup water supply. The Water Resources Development Act of 2022 contained my provision authorizing the Army Corps to conduct a feasibility study on a secondary drinking water source and additional drinking water storage capability for DC. I am deeply disappointed the Army Corps did not fund the study in its fiscal year 2024 budget. Major General Graham, why was this critical project not included in the Army Corps' fiscal year 2024 budget? And does the Army Corps plan to fund it in the fiscal year 2025 budget?
Representative Holznorman, thank you for that question. And yes, the Washington Aqueduct that provides drinking water to metropolitan DC uses the Potomac River as its sole source of water. And we did mitigate that as we can draw out of the Potomac River at two different places, traditionally from Great Falls and then also down at Little Falls. So if the river has an oil spill in it, we can shut one intake off while the other one's working. But most big cities, as you mentioned, do have a tertiary source of water supply. We don't. So we absolutely acknowledge the need to do that.
So is it in your 2025 budget?
With respect to the budget, we have not put together the 2025 budget, and we will certainly take under consideration the need here as we develop that budget. With respect to the 24 budget, the reality is that by the end of the calendar year, the budget is pretty much completed. We've gone through most of the process, and with the authorization not coming until we're to 2022, it just was not considered as part of the 24 budget.
Yeah, well, I'm clear about that it wasn't in the 24 budget, but I do want to go on the record to say this water covers the Congress. It doesn't just cover the District of Columbia. It covers the surrounding area. So I'm urgently asking you to fund it in next year's fiscal year budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Mr. Burleson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I'm from Southwest Missouri, and in Southwest Missouri, Table Rock and Bull Shoals are a critical part of our community. And so you can imagine I'm excited to be on this committee because it really reflects what our community wants and desires and what's important to my district. And so I've heard from a lot of constituents on Table Rock Lake about some concerns. Some of them have to do with declining parks that are not being maintained. And so there's not the money that's being collected from Table Rock from fees and other things are not, they're seemingly going to a general fund, not being poured back into the community that's spending the money. Is that correct?
That's correct. Those fees are not brought back as they are in other federal recreation facilities.
And sadly, the result is that we have a declining, we're having less and less people come to our parks, enjoy what I call God's country, and be able to fish, and because the parks are in decline. I just need you to understand that, and my goal is to figure out how do we reverse course on that. Would you support any legislation or any changes where we have the funds that are made from the park dedicated to the infrastructure at that location?
Congressman, I think it's a great question. We strongly support the recreational program. This year, we worked hard to make sure that we were fully funding the request for recreation. There is legislation pending, I don't know in the House, I know in the Senate, because I just had this conversation in a hearing there, to consider using those funds back in the facilities at which they're generated, those fees. I'm not in a position to endorse any legislation here. I think it's a really good idea that we have that conversation, Congressman, because this recreational part of the Civil Works mission is incredibly important, as you just articulated.
So the other question I have has to do with the issues related to land. So you've got encroachments that are occurring, and I had a really good conversation with Colonel James Schultz yesterday about this, just trying to find out, because I think that you've got to respect the rule of law. We have to, follow the laws as they are. But we have a real-world situation where people inadvertently, unknowingly have built structures on what is now being surveyed under better technology, better tools, what is described as core land. And our conversation about this is that, as someone who's representing the interests of the federal government and my community, I want to make sure that we are consistent, that one neighbor is not getting a different set of rules and guidelines than another neighbor. And certainly there are circumstances here that we have to deal with. You've got some structures like a septic tank, which would be extremely expensive to move, and then some situations where you have somebody that's had a shed that's close, or a deck, which the cost wouldn't be that much. So I get it, you have to figure out some kind of discretion in there. And so my thought is that, can we work together on some kind of guidance that would give a clear line for individuals, and if they're in that situation, they own the land, then they could be able to maybe lease. A person could have the choice to move their shed or move their septic tank, or pay an annual lease or something like that to the Corps. And then that might help out the other problem that we have, which is the funding.
Congressman Burleson, thank you for that question. And we have encroachment challenges all across the Corps portfolio. And in many instances, one of the authorized purposes, as you spoke to, was recreation, and we wanted these lakes to serve as tremendous opportunities in, as you said, God's country. And they've succeeded magnificently. Everybody wants to be there. And unfortunately, we didn't control where exactly the government property started as well as we should have. So General Spellman's guidance to us is try to keep things out of DC as much as you possibly can, and you can understand that, and let the project manager, the district commander make common sense calls. So that's our commitment to you, is work these out issue by issue with landowners. Our park managers out there are absolutely committed to that. And when we have challenges that they can't solve, they know to rapidly get them up to myself and Mr. Connor. That's our commitment to you.
But you don't believe that there's some need to change the rule or create some kind of circumstance that can be applicable to everyone?
So right now, I think individual solutions to individual challenges with some more broader oversight to make sure that we're generally consistent. Now, we certainly need to be consistent on Table Rock Lake itself, absolutely.
I see.
But to take a methodology that works at Table Rock Lake elsewhere, rather not.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Slaughton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for this critical discussion discerning the path that best leverages the taxpayers' dollars to benefit our communities and protect critical water resources. It's one of our highest responsibilities, and I appreciate the expertise of all of our witnesses today. I'm so proud to represent miles of beautiful Lake Michigan shoreline, including the coastal communities of Grand Haven and Muskegon. Maintaining the harbor in Grand Haven in particular is essential to the economy of not only Michigan's 3rd Congressional District, but to Michigan as a whole. Commodities handled by the harbor support over $3.9 billion in business revenue, over 23,000 jobs, and $1.2 billion in labor income. In addition, if the harbor is not maintained, commodities that typically travel by water, including sand, gravel, salt, cement, and manufactured goods, would have to be transported by train and truck, which would increase annual emission rates of over 10.5 million pounds of harmful particulate matter. The cost to our economy, workforce, environment, and West Michigan cannot be overstated. This question is for Assistant Secretary Connor or Major General Graham, whoever wants to chime in. My staff recently had the opportunity to meet with the local Corps representatives and learned about the work being done to maintain the Grand Haven and Muskegon harbors and the surrounding area, including maintenance, dredging, and repairing breakwaters and pierheads damaged by high lake levels. In the event that my friends on the other side of the aisle decide to move forward with drastic cuts to funding level, what is the Corps' plan to finish these ongoing projects with less funding than promised?
I'll start. Well, it's difficult to do the work that's anticipated if we're not getting the resources we need, even with expanded resources through the bipartisan infrastructure law, with the write-ins that we've had to our budget and the annual appropriations process. It's been difficult to keep up, particularly with some of the important but smaller ports. So that's the bottom line answer. It's very difficult to complete these projects. We are using the tools that Congress has provided us, advanced funding from our partners, to folks just taking on the work that for expanding some of these ports and harbors, and we'll continue with the O&M. So there's mechanisms to try and advance the work, but they're difficult and they're burdensome on the local sponsors. But stepping back for a moment, absolutely agree. The advantages of our waterway system in moving goods is not only an advantage regionally within the country, it's an international economic advantage that we have in this country to get products out to market. So maintaining and investing more in our inland and coastal waterways is just incredibly important. I absolutely agree with you. That's what I'm saying.
And if I could add on, certainly on Muskegon Harbor, the world is changing, as I said in my opening statement. We had dredged that harbor like every 3 to 5 years, and now we're finding out we've got to dredge it annually. So we're using emergency funds in '23 to get that harbor back to its 29-foot authorized depths. But climate change, a different world, is compounding the challenge you stated.
Major General Graham, you anticipated my next question, following up on, I know the increased frequency there in the dredging, so thank you. We're committed to making sure you have the resources needed to maintain that harbor. I want to stick with you for a second and follow up on a different project, though not in my district, critically important to our economy in Michigan and the region, the SULOX project, which is so important for ensuring resiliency in the Great Lakes navigation system by providing a second navigation lock large enough to enable the 1,000-foot Lakers to transit between Lake Superior and the lower lakes. The Corps' FY24 budget requests $235 million to continue construction of the new SULOX in the Great Lakes, But I understand that the Corps actually has the capability to spend almost $630 million in FY24 on this project. I also understand that some of the project's costs will have to be renegotiated if the Corps doesn't receive enough funding for the project in FY24, which would likely increase the project's total cost. How much FY24 funding would the Corps need to execute those expiring contract elements?
The answer to the question, I know time is up, is the additional capability is that $394 million that you spoke to.
Thank you. And if there's additional information we need, feel free to submit it for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Connor and Major General Graham, I'm the congressman from the 10th District of Georgia, and my colleague and next-door neighbor, Congressman Rick Allen from District 12, and many of his constituents have a very important issue. It's so important that the day I got my committee assignments and subcommittee assignments, that man was sitting in my office, not to congratulate me, but to identify a problem that he wanted to make sure that we put before you, and that is with the new Savannah Bluff Lock and Dam. And what I'm asking is, I want to know if both of you will commit to me today that the Army Corps of Engineers will work with the stakeholders to find an acceptable solution for the environmental mitigation required as part of the now completed Savannah Harbor Expansion Project. And specifically, any resolution should ensure that existing water levels of the new Savannah Bluff Lock and Dam Pool are maintained as required in Section 1319 of the WIN Act of 2016.
Representative Collins, thank you for that question. And certainly the Savannah Harbor expansion has been a wonderful economic engine, and we've got to complete it. And completing the mitigation measures up at New Savannah Bluff Lock and Dam is part of that. So you have our commitment to continue to work with local stakeholders, with local state officials, to make sure that all voices are heard. This is in litigation. We had some rulings earlier in this month that I believe remanded it back, that I believe has moved us a step closer. But with ongoing litigation, this is going to continue to be not an easy path forward.
Secretary Connor, would you weigh in on that?
Well, absolutely. I'm not familiar with these details, Congressman, but to the extent that the Corps needs the support of my office and myself and my involvement, absolutely committed to working through these issues. This is an incredibly important project.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I want to shift gears here for a quick minute. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Mr. Leish?
Yes, sir, Lyash.
Lyash? How do you see America's industrial base affecting the TVA's ability to continue providing power to consumers over the long term?
In the challenge for the power industry, I think, over the next couple of decades is going to be to support an expanding reliance on electricity, which by many accounts will double or more over the next 30 years, and to maintain that energy security, reliable, affordable, resilient, and at the same time, decarbonize that power supply. And I think that's going to be critical in supporting the growth of America's industrial base. I think my fellow executives across the nation understand that very well. For TVA's role in this, we have put in place plans to expand our renewables base, expand our nuclear fleet to produce energy, and to maintain the right balanced mix to support that economic growth and national security.
All right. Thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Rouser and Ranking Member Napolitano, for today's hearing. General Graham, in Miami-Dade County, we are racing against time to move our septic system to sewer. So I made this issue one of my top appropriation requests so that Miami-Dade could receive funding up to $190 million to protect countless individuals from pathogens introduced by wastewater contamination. When this funding is approved to assist the county septic to sewer project, can the Corps commit to making this project a top priority?
Congressman Wilson, I'm not familiar with that project, but we will certainly get with the Jacksonville District and follow up with you.
Well, thank you so much. Also, in your testimony, you spoke of the Corps' intent to advance your mission of aquatic ecosystem restoration using the President's $7 billion discretionary funding budget. As the Civil Works Program advances its mission, I want to bring your attention to Biscayne Bay in Miami-Dade and the bay's need for conservation and restoration investment, specifically addressing propeller scars and water quality. As the bay continues to undergo heavy boating and usage, what steps should Miami-Dade County take to protect the bay and gain support for restoration from the Corps?
Representative, there's a lot going on with respect to Biscayne Bay. And associated with South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Program, we've used the bipartisan infrastructure law to fund the study for the ecosystem protection restoration activity that we need in the Bay. In addition, we've got the coastal flood protection activities going on in that area. So we're resourcing those efforts with the idea that we will get to a project authorization timeframe for moving forward with WRDA, and we are actively working with the local sponsors and the interested public, as you note, to ensure that we've got the coastal flood protection activities in place. So the studies hopefully will transition soon to authorized programs and activities, but I just want to assure you that this is a high priority to finish that work and get on to the actual work on the ground that we need to do, protect Biscayne Bay itself as a environmental treasure, but also the communities behind the bay.
And, ma'am, if I could add that the Corps does nothing by itself. We have a partner in everything we do, and certainly one of the best partners we have is the South Florida Water Management District. Mr. Drew Bartlett and his team down there, I sometimes mistake some of their folks for my own folks, that the collaboration they have is so tight. So our commitment to you is to continue to work with the state, with the South Florida Water Management District, certainly with Miami-Dade, to make sure that we're meeting the needs of your constituents.
Thank you. I'll let them know that. Thank you. Also, Mr. Connor, communities in my district have been battling the effects of tidal flooding and sea level rise. In your testimony, you mentioned investments of $1.4 billion for climate-focused construction. Can you detail the technical and planning assistance that will address environmental justice in communities like mine with these programs? This is for flood and storm damage reduction for programs that will directly benefit disadvantaged communities.
Absolutely. There is, once again, a lot going on in this space, Congresswoman Wilson. I issued guidance to the Corps last year, what it is moving out on, which is intended to better use the programs we have, such as the Planning Assistance to States, Floodplain Management Services programs, where Congress has given us the tool to be generous with respect to federal cost share so that we can work with economically disadvantaged and historically marginalized communities. That's one aspect. So reaching out and ensuring that communities are aware of these programs and the opportunities is part of the process. We're also moving forward on WRDA 2020 provisions that allow us to do investigations at full federal cost for economically disadvantaged communities. We've got $30 million available in the bipartisan infrastructure law funding to move forward with his investigations. We've just got to finish the guidance on that, as well as our continuing authority programs, the small programs, $10 million projects that we can do with communities. Once again, WRDA 2020 authorized us to do a pilot to fully fund those projects for economically disadvantaged communities. So we're just about wrapped up with that guidance, and we will use some of our bipartisan infrastructure law resources to do funding announcement and seek proposals from marginalized and economically disadvantaged communities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For General Graham and Mr. Connor, the Supreme Court decision on Sackett, maybe it's been talked about, I haven't been in this committee for other committees, but it was really a beneficial action, and it's been a long time coming. So it's important because it's been so long in order to get a rational standard for what waters in the United States would be. So does the Corps plan to update their year 24 budget request after the Supreme Court decision in Sackett? Meaning there's probably going to be a lot less waters of the United States work to be done, therefore less time spent on that. Is there going to be a budget update in that request for less work?
So, no, I am not anticipating a budget amendment request at this point in time. I'd just like to point out that about 92% of the permitting work we do under the Clean Water Act is done through general permits. These are the nationwide permits, the regional permits that we have in place that provide clear guidelines for entities to, if they're only impacting small numbers of wetlands, they can move forward under those general permitting. 92% take, on average, about 40 to 45 days to complete those actions. There are 8% of those permitting actions that are very significant developments that go under individual permits, and those are the time-consuming
I appreciate that. I got to keep moving here.
So,
well, the Sacramento office seems to take a lot longer getting stuff done and delineated when it comes to agricultural practices that have been long-standing. So outside these budget numbers, do you believe that with this more rational WOTUS definition that will allow more time to worry about things like flood control? General.
Representative LaMalfa, so certainly clarity in what constitutes waters of the United States will be helpful to our regulators out there. As Mr. Connor spoke to, right now, our regulators, to meet our standards for the general permits, 60 days to turn those is our standard. And we're only meeting that 75% of the time. On the more complex individual permits, our standard is 120 days. And we're hitting that at only about 50%.
So now if I didn't get my taxes done or my DMV done at 50% or 75% of the time, what would happen to me?
You'd be in trouble.
Yeah, okay.
So we absolutely recognize that that performance is unsatisfactory.
Yes, it is. It's taken very long for simple things to get done. You mentioned with Ms. Napolitano earlier about 7 years so far on the manual update on Oroville Dam and others like that. You know, we go back to 2017 when the spillway broke. And so that was a hot topic soon after that. I have actually brought up with your agency. So what can we expect on getting this work done? I think your answer to her was you've pulled people off of that and they're working on the Sierra snowpack situation?
So we did. When I talked to the Sacramento commander last week, the engineers that do that kind of work are hydrologists to deal with pending flooding on the snowpack coming down in Central Valley. He pulled those off because he has a finite amount of that expertise to work on that.
What is it you don't know about snowpack coming down the Sierra, since it's happened for decades during your existence there? Tulare Lake, this isn't the first time that it's existed as well. What new needs to be done?
Representative, it's dealing with the record snowpack coming down off the Sierras and how fast that may or may not come down.
Well, it's actually coming down on a fairly slow timeline compared to other hotter years. So what is it that you require these resources to be pulled off of doing things like updating this overdue manual that they have to do now?
So those resources are heading back to work on their water control manuals, as you mentioned, that Mother Nature's cooperating with how the snow's coming down. Furthermore, we know that we've got to get the districts that are overwhelmed additional resources, additional technical resources. Either I take them from other places in the Corps or we hire that expertise out, and that's our commitment to you.
Well, with the less WOTUS responsibilities, it would seem like you would have the resources available and pull from that 8% the gentleman was speaking of. So can we have a better commitment that we can, in a recent conversation, you said we're still 2 or 3 years away or more on the manual update for how our flood actions are going to be taken on Oroville and others. Do we have a stronger commitment of getting it done sooner so we can manage the lake with modern instead of 1970 data?
Our commitment to you is to have a great sense of urgency to get that work done as fast as possible.
All right, I appreciate that. We'll be talking. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses. Welcome to the committee. Assistant Secretary Connor, I have some happy constituents in the North Bay, in San Rafael, where the San Rafael Channel in my district has finally had dredging completed. A little further north in the Petaluma River, another one of the small harbors and ports in the Bay Area that struggle to get maintenance dredging, but we got it done in Petaluma, and in both of these places, it's really been transformative to watch these water bodies come back to life, the commercial navigation, the recreation, everything that goes with it. The only thing that people are unhappy about is they had to wait 20 years to get maintenance dredging that was supposed to happen every 6 to 8 years. And we are hoping that we don't have to wait 20 years the next time around. I know that in this regard, I'm not alone. Many of my Bay Area congressional colleagues have similar frustrations at getting regular maintenance dredging for small harbors and ports. And there are solutions to this problem, surely including regional cooperation between ports and the Corps to schedule dredging together and to work collaboratively, and also looking at leveraging private-public partnerships or other alternative models that will allow these dredging activities to happen more frequently. And we've been working on this for many years in WRDA. In 2018, we authorized you to award coastal navigation, operation, and management and maintenance contracts for work at multiple harbors in the same geographic area if you determined that that would provide cost savings compared to a project-by-project contracting basis, which surely it will in most cases. I was able to include some language in the 2022 WRDA to create this authority for a regional dredge partnership in the San Francisco Bay region. Ports in my district and those that are in neighboring districts don't want to have to wait until one of our ports is 20 years out of cycle for its maintenance dredge and then try to piggyback on that contract. We want to do better. Assistant Secretary Connor and Major General Graham, I just want to ask you, before the next WRDA, it is my priority to finalize a regional partnership agreement between the Corps and the San Francisco Bay Area small ports to either secure a more regular dredging timeline or some equipment, such as a dredge for the region that can help us do better going forward. Can I get your commitment to work with me and my colleagues on this?
Representative Huffman, absolutely have our commitment to work with you on that. I think our statistic is of the over 1,000 federally authorized channels, we get to about 15% of those every year. So that's going to, past this prologue, that's what we're going to see in the future unless we do something different. I think one exciting area, particularly I think San Francisco Bay is leading the way in this, is the beneficial reuse of dredge material. We're learning a lot by what the San Francisco district and the local communities are doing out there. And so we're using about 30% of our material right now beneficially, and we're working hard. Our guidance is to get that to 70%. So we absolutely, you have our commitment to keep working with you to achieve those goals.
Well, Assistant Secretary, please.
I was just going to add, demand outstrips the resources. So to the extent that you're giving new tools for us to use so that we can do our business more efficiently in partnership with others, I'm all in. So yes, you've got my commitment.
Thank you very much. The Major General anticipated the next question, which was about beneficial reuse. We have all kinds of opportunities to do that in the Bay Area, and we have been trying. Every WRDA, we seem to push more guidance, more directives at the Corps, and yet there is an awful lot of stubborn resistance. The Corps continues to sort of dredge and dispose of this material the way it always has. Too much ocean disposal, which is just a wasteful thing, probably not so good for the aquatic ecosystem to dump massive clouds of fine sediment out in the ocean near marine sanctuaries and other places. So we need to do better, and I was encouraged, Major General, that you recently, Commanding General Spellman issued a philosophy notice in January of this year on this subject, establishing a goal for the Corps to advance this practice to 70% by 2030. It's a good start. I hope we can do even better, but what can we do to break through this institutional resistance and finally realize the benefits of beneficial reuse?
So Gerald Spellman's been pretty clear grading my homework that I'm not doing well enough, and we've got to get up to that 70%. We usually don't come up with any bright ideas here in Washington, D.C. The innovation that you seek is generated at the local level, at the field level. And so it's making sure that those good ideas get past what's known as the frozen middle, the folks with a bag of no's that pull that out. So our commitment to you is to try to take those bags of no's from those people as much as we possibly can and get to yes to unleash the local creativity of your constituents in our districts.
That's great. Thanks so much. Yield back.
Mr. Duarte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Caught me by surprise. I certainly want to support my colleagues' comments on dredging. Mr. Huffman, Congressman Huffman, I strongly agree with you. Appreciate you coming to bat on that. General, this is an excerpt from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Jurisdictional Determination Form Instructional Guidebook from 2007. It's post-Rapanos and kind of gives you the updated what to do with the split rulings and no decision at all that came out of the Rapanos case. And it has a several-page decision tree. What is a wetland? What is not a wetland? And it's what stands today, I believe, in terms of your delineation of jurisdictions and what and why you call a wetland jurisdictional or not. Are you committed, now that we have the Sackett case ruling, to simply go through this decision tree and give some immediate guidance on what is or isn't jurisdictional based on your own set of standards in the very, very clear direction from the from the Sackett decision we had handed down recently?
If I could take that, Congressman, absolutely, we are committed to moving forward. As we discussed earlier in this hearing, we are expeditiously moving forward with a new rule that will be consistent with the Sackett decision that will obviously be more streamlined. We will take the rule we developed in 2023. There are certain aspects of that rule, such as significant nexus, which is represented by that matrix there, that will no longer be applicable. So we are fully committed to moving forward to...
Well, there's jurisdictions, delineations, verifications, farmers waiting for results, other projects in limbo right now because the rule has been suspended. I think that you could report back to us fairly short order as to what the Sackett case completely eliminates from this list, both in terms of significant nexus jurisdictions and adjacent wetlands were taken to task a bit directly, as that was the core issue of the Sackett case, was not only a significant nexus, but it was an adjacent wetlands case that the Supreme Court ruled on very, very clearly, and that I believe you should be able to take this decision tree and edit it within an afternoon and get back to us at least with a minimal set of exclusions that would be derived from the Sackett case.
Well, our focus is on developing that rule as expeditiously as possible to get back into the business of issuing AJDs. That's our intent and that's our commitment, sir.
So when this rule was developed here, it was developed in cooperation with the Office of Management and Budget as well as the Environmental Environmental Quality Council. There have also been prosecutions conducted by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Justice Division of Water and Environment, sometimes with and sometimes without subject matter jurisdiction. You also cooperate and have a number of memorandums of understanding with the USDA that advises farmers on what wetlands regulations they're subject to and what farming practices fit within the agricultural exemptions and the plowing exclusions of Clean Water Act and the Section 404 permit. The reason I really believe some immediate clarity is important because the significant nexus, in my opinion, was erroneously established to begin with, and now you've got very definite clarity. So you might have some fine lines to draw as to exactly where navigable waters and jurisdictional waters begin and end, but there are hordes of wetlands in many, many small communities and farming operations currently hindered by your current jurisdictional claims that could be eliminated immediately while you work on the finer lines of the new rule. So I want to encourage you, as you come back for funding this year, that you take a serious look at what can be meat cleavered off right now and what advice you want to give to some of your cooperating agencies in terms of your now newly limited jurisdiction and what memorandums of understanding and field guidance letters are now erroneous, incomplete, or can be completely dismissed so that farmers can go back to farming and not wait for delineations to happen. I've waited for them for over a year myself, so I would have to disagree with the good general's characterization that anything is happening within a proper time frame, at least not within the Sacramento office that Congressman LaMalfa was reporting to. It's a joke over there. It's not under-resourced, it's over-regulated. Furthermore, a couple quotes, frozen middle, bag of no's, individual solutions to individual challenges, let the project matter or district commander make common sense calls. All of these introduce a level of subjectivity and uncertainty while you're making the lowest level field agent a regulator and policymaker based on his individual experience and expertise, which may be variable and may be up to interpretation. This is objective, this is clear, this is black and white, and there aren't very many words on the page. I really urge you to establish a clearly delineated decision tree as what is jurisdictional, what is not, and then teach your field agents to abide by it, lest they become subject to accountability as policymakers. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your participation today and for the interest. Let's see, Tennessee Valley a little far away, the Great Lakes even further. Let's just focus on California for a few moments here. First of all, in the Word of 2020, an amendment that I had to make water supply a co-equal task for the core facilities, reservoirs specifically, was modified by the chairwoman into a report from the Corps that was due in June of 2022. The report's subject matter dealt with how to engage water supply with flood control, recreation, and other activities. I believe June of 2022 was 1 year ago. Where is the report, Mr. Connor?
The report has been delayed in the back and forth between my office and the Corps, and apologize for that. As I committed to the ranking member earlier, hopefully it will be back in my office in this coming month, and I will turn it around expeditiously and finalize and move forward with that. And Congressman, just the report is one thing. We need to finish our work. We need to provide the information directed to be determined by Congress. But we're on board with the idea that water supply and drought resilience is part of our mission. And I put out a directive to the Corps about a little less than a year ago, identifying a range of actions that were taken to support water supply out, particularly in the arid West, and we will continue to do that.
There is talk and there is action. So I'm looking for the action. And I do appreciate the fact that some of this is evolving. Nevertheless, that report then will establish the opportunity for us to pass legislation here. So we want to get at that. Also, Mr. LaMalfa raised the question of the operations of the reservoirs, flood control specifically on the Oroville. There is a program that actually Mr. Huffman started on the Russian River that was, I believe, now in place, that essentially allowed the Corps to modify its operational book, that is the flood control manuals, using real-time understanding of what is happening in the watershed. There is no way that 20, 30, 40-year-old assessment of that watershed is applicable today. Yet, in the most, I believe in every case except perhaps the Russian River and the American River in California, the old manual is the document for flood management. We need real-time monitoring. It was discussed, the snowpack, obviously different this year than last year. Every year is different. Real-time monitoring of what is actually going on, the rainfall, the soil conditions, the snow, the temperatures, all of that. It's readily available. I don't understand why this has not been implemented across the entire area. If it is money and if it is direction, then please come to us. Mr. O'Connor and General, if you will opine on why we are not doing it, what you need to move to real-time monitoring.
Congressman, great question. Absolutely agree. I think we're in a transition period right now, and the transition means the Corps has modified, amended its engineering regulations so that we can take into account, forecast-informed reservoir operations. We can take into account real-time modeling. So now we are in the process of getting those tools in place. We've done, I think, 3 or 4 forecast-informed reservoir operations pilots in California. I think one of them we're just about complete with the water control manual changes, and 2 of them we're doing deviations.
I will call you personally and go into it in detail. We don't have too much time left here. Just know that this is a solution that has to be put in place. I've personally been working on this for 15 years. And let's get it done. If you need money, if you need direction, then please tell us, because it is imperative that we move to this, because yesterday is gone, tomorrow we don't know. And we can only know if we understand in real time. And General, the same to you, if you could follow up on it. One final point in the next 18 seconds. I am sure you are aware of Sassoon Slough. Well, you are now. The Corps tried to take it off of the Corps' work list without bothering to contact the congressman from that area that you were going to, I guess, decommission that slough. Bad mistake. I am the congressman. You don't want to do that. I would like to have a dredging plan for that slough in hand before too long. Too long is within the next year. Thank you very much. I yield back.
For Ezel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Connor, I recently found out you visited the Port of Gulfport, and I appreciate that very much. That's exciting. Things going on down there that the Port of Gulfport, which is in my district, contributes to the economic health of the region and to the nation. As you know, there's a feasibility study ongoing to deepen and widen the federal navigation channel to Gulfport. Deepening the channel will create economic opportunities not only for South Mississippi, but for the entire nation. I appreciate your attention to this project and applaud your efforts to keep the study going at a timely pace. As you stated, the fiscal year 2024 budget request includes the largest request in history. How will you utilize these resources to keep these projects on schedule?
Congressman, first of all, could I just say I was down at that facility. I had the great opportunity to be there when we signed the feasibility cost share agreement. That is an impressive facility, given not just the diversification with respect to the goods, but the other economic activities that the port supports and the way it's integrated into the community. Very impressive. With respect to the resources that we have, we continue to recognize the need for additional resources, particularly in the investigation side. I mean, I think Congress just authorized another 94 in the most recent WRDA. We have increased in this year's president's budget the investigations funding over last year's. It's not as much as Congress ultimately authorized. There are a lot of needs for very strong, good projects like Gulfport that we need to move forward on. We don't have resources in the 2024 budget, but we are enthusiastically using the resources you provide. So we've expanded a little bit. We obviously haven't expanded enough to meet all the needs for good projects, quite frankly.
Very good. Do you believe that increasing the opportunities at underutilized ports like the Port of Gulfport would provide environmental relief as well?
I think the more we use our waterways, including our ports, and the more efficiently we can move goods through expanded capacity is good for the environment. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I want to talk about another issue going on, and it's important to South Mississippi. The 2019 decision to open the Bonnie Carey Spillway twice during the height of the tourist season led to almost total loss of our wild oysters in the Mississippi Sound estuary. The closure of many small and family-owned businesses and sent harmful algae blooms into the Gulf and out into the beaches. It was terrible. In January, the U.S. District Judge Garola ruled in favor of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, stating the Corps is ordered to consult with National Marine Fisheries Service regarding the impacts of the spillway openings as required by MSA. Has the court started these consultations with, and if not, when can we expect them to do that? Mr. Connor.
I know there's an ongoing dialogue about our operation of the Bonnie Carey Spillway, and I'm not sure the specific actions taken as a result of the litigation at this point in time. I do know that this is part of the reason why we've just kicked off the Lower Mississippi River Comprehensive Study. We are looking at the system as a whole to understand whether it's operating as it was originally intended, and if not, how do we restore capacity and how do we address the new challenges that we see environmentally. If we're going to have those high flows requiring spillway operation, what do we need to be doing on the Atchafalaya, as well as how do we need to be looking at the system differently. So in that aspect, we are not just working with the states and local partners, but bringing in other agencies. That'll be part of that dialogue. I'm just not sure specifically what we've done as a result of the litigation, sir. But we can get back to you on the record.
Thank you. It was good to see that the Corps issued a statement that announced the beginning of the Lower Mississippi River Comprehensive Management Study. Thank you for doing that. And can you please include the communities, especially some of these business owners who lost everything as a result, and get these folks involved in these conversations?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you again for your leadership on these issues. We'll have some more questions in the future. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. DeSaulnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Major General, I want to just acknowledge Brigadier General Gant, who came to my office. I represent, there are a lot of Californians on this subcommittee. I represent a very large part of the San Joaquin Delta, and have for many years. She was great. She came in and we talked about beneficial use that a lot of history on. So I want to acknowledge her and your team out there. They're doing good work. And your acknowledgement of the work that state and locals have done on this issue in the San Francisco Bay, but specifically in the Delta, the largest estuary west of the Mississippi. Secretary Connor, I wanted to talk to you about coordination and the need for coordination between state, federal, and regional and local jurisdictions, in particular, in my experience in California and representing the Delta. And just sort of coincidentally, I don't know if you saw the New York Times today, and the headline story on the front page, extensive story, the 3 trillion gallon question, extreme weather is threatening California infrastructure and dams. I don't know if you had a chance to see that.
I did see the headline.
I just want to read you a quote from it, from a former head of the U.S. Geological Survey. He said the peak record that is their look at climate change and these extreme weather events record is driving a lot of engineering decisions in the state. He says that the peak is an underestimate, maybe a gross one. Quote, already we are seeing several 100-year floods every 10 years. Some of this miscalculation, the story goes on, arises from our failure to account for climate change, a problem that will only get worse as the atmosphere heats up and the amount of water vapor it can carry increases. Quote, Geological Survey expert said, all of this infrastructure is designed for a climate that no longer exists. But the error also lies in understanding of the past. Most of the flood data that form the basis of the design of California's dams and infrastructure, I would add, come from the past century, which was an unusually placid period in state's weather. So my question to you is, having been involved in climate change on the air quality side and representing this area so important for our water infrastructure, is the coordination between the state and the federal agencies. Recently had a meeting with the Bureau. We're trying to get a record of decision on the Los Vaqueros Reservoir, 30 years of work, including with my predecessor who represented the area and was chair and ranking member of the Resources Committee here in the House for years, George Miller. We have agreement from the environmental community, from the business community, from the water community. We're having problems getting the governmental agencies. So how are you working with other federal agencies and with state agencies in California in light of this most recent article? But for instance, on Los Vaqueros, now we're worried about that specific project getting involved with the peripheral canal, which I'm told is in the middle of conversations that will change momentarily in the budget in the legislature. All of these issues about coordination. Major General, your comments about the bag of no's. When we're not coordinating, it gets easy for mission creep in different agencies at every level. So how are we coordinating, given the urgency of this, what I just quoted to you, that although we've had years to plan for this, we're not prepared and we're letting bureaucracy get in the way of this? How are we coordinating with other federal agencies and with state agencies in this instance?
I will try and be brief because it's a huge issue that you just articulated. One, we're very fortunate in California to have a great partner, and particularly for the Corps, the Department of Water Resources. So I do believe that we are integrating the most, the best science that we have about the future challenges that we have, particularly as we design a number of flood control projects with the state as our local sponsor. We are looking at the increased levels of flows that are projected given the dynamics of climate change. That's why we have an R&D initiative in our budget. And so with respect to new project development, we've got a great partner with the state to look at that science and to integrate new features, engineering with nature, so that we're not just trying to, control Mother Nature as much as use it where it's appropriate. Two, with respect to operations, I think General Graham referred to this earlier, one of the things we've been doing with the record snowpack this year is monitoring that snowpack on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis. And we've been able to do that because California has instituted, new aggressive modeling of the snowpack using LIDAR, continuous information that allows us to day-to-day assess the likelihood of significant runoff, and that helps us manage our reservoirs and manage potential flooding in the Central Valley. So we've got to have the best science available. We've got to up our game with respect to the coordination with the state and across federal agencies. An example that we need to do more is this forecast informed reservoir operations.
I'll jump in here because my time has expired and I want to be respectful of the time. I want to talk to you more about this, as does other members of the delegation. The urgency, people's lives and the U.S. economy is at stake. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Gonzalez-Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, the witnesses, for coming here. And I need to say that I'm really happy to have here the Corps of Engineers and the rest of the witnesses. Especially, I want to acknowledge Assistant Secretary Connor and General Graham from the Army Corps, which has been a critical partner for Puerto Rico in very challenging situations. And I welcome you every time in Puerto Rico, so I want to say thank you. I really believe that you are one, if not the top federal agency that actually do things in Puerto Rico in a timely manner. And that's something when you get hit with hurricanes and you are still going through the recovery of the island. So I want to say all people and staff from the Army Corps has been very critical for the redevelopment of the island. And I need to say this because you may have not the same experience in other states, but yes, in Puerto Rico, we do appreciate all the hard work of the Army Corps. And having said that, I need to acknowledge as well that, as General Graham just mentioned, the formation of the Special Task Force for the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico to help speed that rebuilding and overcome implementation obstacles. I mean, it's been more than 5 years after the hurricane, and many of the processes were stalled, not in the Army Corps, but with general permits in the federal agencies, local agencies, and having that task force being implemented for the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico will help us expedite a lot of the permitting, a lot of the issues that were unsolved during the last year. So I want to say thank you. I do recommend that should be the way to go with many federal agencies in the recovery process of the island, so thank you for that. And this is going to be my questions. One important, and this is for Secretary Connor and General Graham, one important concern of mine is the effect, as we discussed privately before, of the inflation and supply chain cost increases on the ability of Army Corps to complete authorized projects. Projects are already started or are in planning stages. For example, in Puerto Rico, Rio Puerto Nuevo, Rio La Plata, Rio Guanajibo, Rio Nigua, Guayanilla, and many others, will end up with a real total cost significantly greater than the than was originally authorized or appropriated. My question will be, how does the Corps of Engineers will address this? Do we have to go through the whole reauthorization process and reappropriation process all over again, and maybe even bring the projects to a stop while we do it? Or do we reduce the projects and leave phases undone, or split those phases to have to go through the whole process of reauthorization and appropriations all over again? I don't know what's going to be your recommendation, but I mean, if this process must change, how should we change it?
Certainly, thank you for that question, and thank you for the kind words for the Jacksonville District and South Atlantic Division as standing up a standalone task force to deal with the magnitude of work down there. Ms. Jackie Kaiser, who's the senior civilian on that, she's the best we've got. So, and she's absolutely committed to deliver for your constituents. As part of our FEMA work, we've got folks on the island right now because we thought that that tropical storm, begins with the B,
Brett,
it was heading your way. And so we got a power PRT team right there right now in response to that. In addition, we've got the additional FEMA power generation that's spinning right now supporting grid resiliency on the island. And to your question directly, we've got controllable and uncontrollable cost increases out there. Inflation's running somewhere between 25 to 40%. And as you spoke to, we're going to have to deal with those realities. There are some controllable cost increases that are our responsibility. And most of those, when we pull the thread back and get to the root cause, it's the design wasn't as mature as we would have liked it to have been when we were given a funding opportunity window. And that's our responsibility. So the systemic piece that the Corps has to do better on is our cost estimates that are sitting on the shelf have to be updated. So where we're at today with the Puerto Rico work, I would say generally the costs are absolutely going to go up, particularly on those big three projects that you mentioned. When you get down to Rio Puerto Nuevo, when you walk through that, you've done a lot of flood risk management in urban areas, and with that ancient city, that's about as difficult as it possibly is going to get. So our commitment to you is to put everything on the table as transparently as we can and communicate with you when we see these challenges and the magnitude of the challenge. We should have certified cost estimates, particularly on those big three projects, back ideally next month, and Jackie will be paying you a visit.
Thank you. I know my time has expired. I will submit some other questions for the record, and thank you for your good work. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you allowing me to wave onto the committee as I have some issues that I'd like to discuss with our TVA president, Mr. Lyash. So thank you, sir. Firstly, I'd like to just say this has been a great opportunity to listen to some of my members' questions, some of the officials here, and ask for assurances and guarantees, and they've all given assurances and guarantees, so I think this is teeing us up real well. You know that the federal government would like to have a zero net carbon policy by 2035. TVA is at 2050, if I understand correctly. Can you assure me that you will get it down to 2035?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Cohen. Always a pleasure to see you, and I enjoy our conversations on this and other topics. TVA's goal is, as many other utilities, is to get to net zero carbon by 2050, and we would like to go farther, faster. So we're taking every available action to add carbon-free resources to the system. We've been focused on optimizing our hydroelectric fleet, expanding our nuclear capability, adding aggressively renewables like solar and wind to the stack, as well as storage, which is important. And we're focused on doing this while maintaining energy security, and by that I mean affordable, reliable, and resilient power for our customers, and decarbonizing.
Let me stop you for a minute, because I kind of know, I've heard
Yeah.
most of this speech before. You've got 3 gas plants that you've got online to build at Cumberland, Kingston, and Cheatham, new natural gas plants. You plan to go along with those 3 new?
The Kingston project is still under evaluation. We've issued a draft environmental impact statement, and we're taking public input on that currently, as well as trying to update that analysis to reflect the potential impacts of the IRA. So that
That's
decision
good on
is not
Kingston.
final.
How about Cheatham and Cumberland?
Cumberland, the final environmental impact statement has been issued, and the board's decision was to retire those coal units and to replace that critical capacity with a gas-fired combined cycle plant, and that project is underway.
So that's going to contribute to putting off from 2035 to 2050 your net zero.
Yeah, the retirement of the Cumberland coal units and the replacement gas is about a 60% reduction in the carbon emissions from those sites. Over time, as we deploy additional renewables and hopefully additional nuclear, we would expect to be able to operate less gas and have it as a capacity resource and use less energy, thereby reducing our carbon over time.
The price of natural gas has gone up because of the Ukraine-Russia war, et cetera. Does that affect the cost of gas that TVA buys as well?
It does, although because 60% of our energy comes from sources that really have zero carbon and zero fuel cost, there's a natural hedge in the diversity of our portfolio. We rely about 28% on natural gas, so when the price goes up, we do see that impact. That we saw that price go from about $3 an MMBTU to as high as 12 or 15. It is currently back to $2.50, sort of pre-crisis levels. In the long term, though, we do expect upward price pressure on that natural gas.
So does that make it
and we
less
plan for that.
of a good investment to take Cumberland and Cheatham and make them into natural gas plants rather than go into more alternative types of energy that are net zero?
Yeah, I think the answer is we need to do all of those. We're adding solar as fast as we can obtain access to panels, so the constraint there is supply chain. The natural gas simple cycle and combined cycle plant are flexible, dispatchable, and resilient, so they represent a capacity resource.
Let me
even
stop
if
you
they're
here.
not
I've got
producing
just
energy.
50 seconds left, and I'm getting the impression I'm not going to get an assurance that we're going to get down to net zero by 2035.
That's our objective.
It is your objective.
Our objective is to move that net zero performance forward as far as fast as we can. What we've said is we have line of sight to get to 80% by 2035.
Let me ask you this. The TVA Act clearly requires disclosure of TVA employee compensation. I've asked you on many occasions to give us TVA salaries and disclose that information. You've not done it. Why do you refuse to give out the salaries? We know your salary, which is give or take $10 million this year. Is that correct? $9 million?
Yeah, 8 million. Thank you.
8 million. It's tough. Yeah. But how about all the other employees that earn $1 million or more, which we've requested their salaries? You've never released those. Why is that?
We're required by the Securities and Exchange Commission.
You're required by the TVA Act to disclose TVA employee compensation.
Yeah, and that provision of the act we complied with by submitting the required report to the Congress and the White House for many years. The requirement was changed as part of a record reductions effort, and we were requested to stop providing that report several years ago. and so that's no longer required. We do provide a comprehensive compensation disclosure to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which lays out the
But
entire
that's not the
structure and
people.
metrics.
That's not the people that created the TVA. That's not what the TVA Act requires. And that's just not right, Jeff. It's not right. You're part of the government. You're created by the United States government. You're part of it. Salaries should be transparent.
Gentleman's
And when
time's
people are making
expired.
over $1 billion, the public ought to know who they are and what they're doing.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to start out with my friend, Mr. Cohen. Mr. Lash, I had no intention of asking you any questions, but I am going to say that I'm going to associate myself with Mr. Cohen's comments. Your position's unsustainable. Just want to be very clear. You're a government entity. Your position's unsustainable.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question I heard?
It's not a question. I'm just telling you, your position is unsustainable if you're not going to provide him the information he's asking for. You're a government entity. You need to provide him the information. And I'd just give you a little counsel there. I'd strongly urge you to do it. Otherwise, you're going to be compelled to do it, and you can either cooperate or it's going to get a little ugly. I'd urge you to comply with his request. Secretary Connor, thanks for being here. I saw that look on your face when you heard that salary number. You were thinking that was pretty close to yours, right? First of all, I want to thank you for the funding decision on Bayou Sora Locks and just dealing with the bureaucracy there. We don't need to get into it. Just say thank you. I appreciate you doing that. I think it does cut through some of the red tape and allow us to move forward on that project. Still a long way to go, but be able to move forward on that project in a more efficient manner, saving significant dollars. So thank you for that. Look, the other thing I want to bring up that's really important, I heard General Graham just make reference to a figure of 25 to 35% inflation. Mr. Secretary, you and I have talked about the Comey project. This project dates back to the early 1980s. We fully funded the project back in BBA 18 based on the Corps' numbers. And gosh, I would love to have a 25 to 35% inflation rate on that project. Unfortunately, depending on which number I choose, we're probably looking at about a 300% inflation rate based on the initial BBA allocation. We're looking at a 200% or so inflation rate based on the resiliency funds that we grabbed a few years later. Bottom line is, I just want to hear you update us on that project, or one of you update us on the project and give me a commitment that you're going to finish this thing. Look, at half of a river half of a diversion structure doesn't do any good.
Representative Graves, first, thanks for the question. And absolutely agree with the cost increases at Comey. There's a report at the edge of my desk that my chief engineer looked at that said, how did we get here? So as you spoke to inflation, understandable, the uncontrollable pieces, 25 to 30%, but a doubling, if not more, of the cost. How did we get here? And what the report says is the challenge with benefit to cost ratio. So they engineered this as far as they could. This project has been in design for a while. So what does that mean? They engineered basically a grass ditch, and then for the step-down structures around the bayous, they put those, which is all they could afford under the benefit cost ratio, basically gabion structures relatively on grade. And so when we built that first section down along the river, shockingly, it didn't perform all that well. The grass channel didn't hold up, and the structure started to sink. So we realized that, okay, that was too much risk to take with the engineering. It's got to be multiple courses of geotextile reinforced stone, and we can't use gabion structures. They're going to have to be truly engineered structures on POW footings. So you could say the path to damnation was paved with good intentions. They worked as hard as their engineering would allow them to get to for the benefit to cost ratio, but we realized that the engineering just wasn't sound enough. So we own that. We absolutely own that.
All right.
Congress, can I just add, just real quickly, we are making huge decisions based on bad information, and we need to make sure our cost estimates are updated on an ongoing basis, and we need to make sure we've taken them far enough along in the design process to be, representative of good, accurate numbers. And so I think General Graham and General Spellman are committed to ensuring we learn lessons and we update, and we have the resources to update these cost estimates because we're creating problems ourselves.
And your commitment to finish the project.
We are absolutely committed to finishing the project because
Thank you.
the worst of all worlds is an unfinished project.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. General, real quick, I know you recently went to Morganza, the Gulf Project. We've worked together to come up with this new design using local material, native material. I just want to make sure that you remain committed to allowing the use of local material to build that levee, saving literally billions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Okay. Look, I've got a gazillion other things. I'm just going to say that we continue to have issues on HPS crediting. We continue to have issues on the CELA deferred payment agreement. That we're looking at over $100 million in interest a year because of the Corps' delays in renegotiating that. The committee, on a bipartisan basis, has asked for information on how you're spending your IIJA regulatory funds. We haven't heard anything back. I'm going to submit stuff for the record. Thank you all for being here. Could keep you here all day. Take care.
Chair now recognize Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Mr. Napolitano, probably one of the kindest members of Congress. I'll go on the record and say that. Mr. Graves, Mr. Cohen, my first question actually dealt with this, Mr. Lyash, and I'd like to go a little further. The Tennessee Valley Authority employees, they are federal employees, and federal employees' salaries are public information. I'd like you to answer to me, not in a lawyer terms, but just reality, why aren't TVA salaries or pay tables public?
Yeah, Congressman, thank you for the question, and I respect the perspective. As I said, TVA is required by the Act to maintain competitive compensation benchmark to the industry. We make an attempt in our compensation disclosure document to comprehensively disclose the framework and the objectives, the metrics that are used to determine compensation, and we disclose the senior executive salary. We don't disclose, you are correct, the entirety of TVA employee salaries. And the reason here is that we operate in a very competitive market for these resources. Engineers, nuclear operators, security specialist personnel. And so if we're not required to, disclosing that information publicly would put us at a very significant disadvantage.
Well, let me stop you there.
market.
How is that any different from any other public entity, a school board? I mean, they're competing in Knoxville, Tennessee. Everybody's competing with Oak Ridge National Laboratory if you're a skilled tradesman. But yet we know how much they're making, and I'm not seeing the problem there. So explain that to me. How can that be? They can always just call them and say, how much are you making? Would you like to make this much more?
Yeah. Again, Congressman Burchett, we strive to comply with all the requirements and the regulations. We believe we are, and we don't believe that disclosing this compensation is in the interest of TVA or the people that we serve and would put us at a competitive disadvantage. That's the reason. I understand we may not agree.
I'd say it's in the interest and the spirit of the law. If I'm not an attorney, but I know Congressman Cohen is, and I believe he would agree with me on that. Well, I tell you, I'm not really getting a favorable answer from you on that. I'm going to be preparing some legislation to do just that, to clarify the situation, and I hope that some of my members across the aisle would be in support of that. Let me ask you about Winter Storm Elliott. TVA completed over 250 near-term actions to improve coordination, communication, and preparedness. Are y'all prepared to handle another extreme weather event?
The short answer is yes. May I amplify?
Please.
Yeah, Winter Storm Elliott was really a once-in-a-generation event. The combination of low temperature, system-wide temperature drop, freezing, and wind put much of our facilities, number of our facilities outside their design basis. And so a lot of the corrective actions you cited were designed to change that design basis and harden those facilities against extreme weather events. Not just cold, but we looked at heat, inundation, drought, cyber attacks. So we're taking a comprehensive review at resiliency. Because it also put the entire eastern U.S. in the same position, and our peers suffered the same, largely the same effects, it created a situation where others were having to curtail us on firm power. And so the question of reliance on off-system resources is a strategic issue we've looked at. And so we're adding a significant amount of generation to the portfolio to reduce that reliance. Working with local power companies as well, who had their own set of lessons learned in their performance, and helping them to do better. So in short, if we had the same event today, Congressman, you would see a significantly different result. But it's our accountability not to stop there, but to look at the whole family of these events.
I would remind you that you all did put out a tweet prior to that we were in good shape, basically. And then when it went out, you told everybody to start cutting power.
Yeah.
So I would hope in the future that that would be the case. Y'all currently hold about $20 billion in debt. I believe that's correct. Is that?
That's correct.
Can y'all continue paying down this debt while making these new energy investments? I know Congressman Cohen had some concerns, and as well as I do, even with these rising interest rates.
Yeah.
And will it affect the ratepayers?
Yeah. We've been successful in reducing our debt down to $20 billion, and with $51 billion worth of assets, that's a strong balance sheet. So I don't see the need to further reduce that debt at the expense of customer rates. But the second part of your question is, given what TVA and other utilities face over the coming decades, we'll have to invest a substantial amount of money to meet load growth, to reach environmental objectives, as Congressman Cohen stated, and that will require funding that will have to flow from debt and rates, the appropriate combination of the two. That is part of the reason why we pulled forward and launched a new integrated resource plan that we will stakeholder over the next year to lay out a 20-year view of what must be done and what it will take. And then that will inform the financial plan to answer exactly the question you're asking.
Okay. I would like to end on this. I know I've run over, but if y'all got a problem with me, I appreciate you getting with me. I don't appreciate any time when somebody calls me out to the woodshed, and you can let your board members know that as well. Because when somebody calls me from my community that I know has been in contact with somebody over there and they're reading me the Riot Act, I don't appreciate it. And I'll leave it with that. You can pass
Congressman,
that on to your
I'd like
board
to.
members.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned.